Welcome to the Behavioral View, presented by CentralReach. Join hosts, Dr. Shannon Hill and Dr. Nissa Van Etten, as they explore cutting-edge topics in behavior analysis with expert guests. Stay informed, stay inspired. This is the Behavioral View.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Behavioral View. This is our August edition. I had to stop and think about what month this is. So, 5th season, 8th episode, and we're really trying to talk today to maybe it's behavior analysts in training, maybe it's early career behavior analysts who haven't had a whole lot of training in the world of billing. And so I am really excited to bring an entire CentralReach team to you guys again this month. As a reminder, my name is Shannon Hill. I'm the editor-in-chief at CentralReach Institute, and my constant partner on Behavioral View is Nissa, who probably wants to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Nissa and Van Etten. I'm saying the whole name this time. Director of Clinical Training and CR Institute here at CentralReach.
And our third panelist today is another one of our amazing BCBAs at CentralReach, and her name is Ellie. Ellie, you want to say hi and tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Hey, I'm Ellie, and I've been a BCBA for about 8 years. I'm a customer success lead at CentralReach. I've been here for a little bit under a year. And yeah, I've worked in a variety of settings and a couple of different states.
And you have a last name, I'm pretty sure.
Sorry, yes, Ellie Mancuso.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today on this fun topic. And our special guest is another member of CentralReach Institute, Olivia.
Yeah.
Say hi. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I am Olivia Teal. I am a BCBA. I have been a BCBA for about 7 years. I also have my MSW. And similar to Ellie, across a couple of different states in the direct care space, and have worked on the managed care insurance side, which is what we're talking about today. And then now have been here with the CentralReach Institute for a little over a year as an ABA content developer.
And we are so thrilled that you decided to come and join us because you've done some amazing work with us. And I am appreciative of your creativity, which shows through in your selection of the kickoff question of the day. Olivia wants to know, what's the weirdest thing you found in your pockets after a full day of working with the client?
I must know. Everybody tell me. I must know.
I can go first because mine's gross, not heartwarming. I'll just get it over the way. Cigarette butts, because I was working with someone who had cigarette pica, and that's no fun, especially if you don't find it until after it goes to the washing machine.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. What else you got?
I love this question because I didn't think about this until you asked the question, but we find so many weird things in our pockets in the course of the work that we do. I have found pieces of salami, tiny little rocks, little toys. I think I found a piece of cheese once. So sometimes it's just the edibles that my kids are trying to grab that maybe they can't have, and the easiest thing to do is shove that salami in your pocket. Forget about it. Yes, Nissa. Yeah, that's
good. And as you were talking, I started to panic. I'm sure that people understood that the cigarette butts were in my pocket to prevent no strange ABA going on there. Okay. Ellie, what about you?
This is a tough one. I feel like I've definitely found just like weird pieces of broken toys, like Barbie heads and things like that. That always catch you by surprise. Yeah. But I also worked for a school, and it was an older building, and there's just a lot of, nails and screwdrivers and weird things that you'd find like falling out that you'd pick up in like a scramble. Those always caught me by surprise too, of like, why do I have a screwdriver in my pocket? How did I not notice that until the end of the workday?
It says a lot about how active we are. All right, then there has to be a reason you asked the question, so hit us with it.
Honestly, it's not. I was racking my brain. It's really not that strange. It's pretty on par with all of you guys. I feel like assessments were always the time I had the weirdest stuff because you're just like grabbing everything. So yeah, like Nissa said, I think I have found like a handful of like 2 Cheez-Its, 6 marbles, puzzle pieces from multiple different puzzles, like all the different things. But what, like you said, Ellie, like not realizing how you don't remember it's in your pocket. I found an entire pile of rocks in both of my pockets at the end of the day one day. And I was like, how have I just been running around the clinic all day with 2 piles of rocks? But you do what you got to do.
Sounds like you're very physically fit.
It's like a weighted vest.
Love it. Love it. Well, all right, let's dive into our topic today. So I was hoping that we could kind of start off with some level setting for our folks who are new to billing, and here is true discovery here. I'm Mrs. favorite sentence that I say. I'm an old lady. And but I'm so old that I predated insurance billing and kind of skipped over that part because I was focused on adult and school. So I get to play the role of the novice and ask the questions. And the first question I would think that would make sense, that made sense to me early on, is can we just level set on the vocabulary and the whole, just a big umbrella overview of the process of getting approved to for insurance to pay for our services? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, is that it's an overview. That's like the big disclaimer I have, is that it's an overview. It's not like payer specific. There's always those nuances. There's always those exceptions that you have to dive into the actual payer requirements for. But just like the general process is like kind of looking at this workflow. We all got the assessments. We got the treatment plan. That's kind of where we all know to start. But then you move into making the requests, and that is usually done over like a portal these days, but sometimes it is still over the phone. And then you have that first clinical review that's done usually by like a master's level clinician. A lot of times they're BCBAs, not all the time. And from that first clinical review, you have these like 3 options here of either approval, which is, I think, the most common that everyone knows. Like, perfect, we got an approval. I know what that is.
That's the woohoo. Yeah.
Exactly. But then you have the administrative denial, which that is more, it has nothing to do with like your clinical information. It has nothing to do with your treatment plan or what you requested. That means there's something in the policy that's preventing an approval. So sometimes that means like lack of ABA coverage. That's pretty rare these days, but sometimes a couple policies will have that. So that's what that is. And then the third option after that first clinical review is peer review, which is kind of a second, more focused clinical review.
Okay. And we are really kind of focusing on the peer review component for today. But everything that you do leading up to peer review is maybe, maybe minimizes the chances that you get there, right? Okay. So what are some tips at those earlier stages that you guys have found that would be helpful in making sure that you get, not making sure. I'm trying to be very careful with this because I know, Olivia, there is no guarantee, right? And there's a lot of variability. So we're not trying to say if you follow all of these steps, then you're going to avoid peer review or you're going to get approved by in peer review. We're just trying to offer some guidance on best practices, right? Okay.
Yeah, because when we'll dive into it, but peer review is not a bad thing. It's not a punishment. It's not a bad thing. It's just like part of the process sometimes. So, yeah.
Okay.
I think talking about peer review, and I know we're going to get into that, but one of the things that I found as a behavior analyst throughout my time in writing treatment plans is anytime I went to peer review, it felt like a punishment. It felt like what was missing. What did I do? And this is something I think many of us in the field have. We have templates. We have, templates that we can use. We put in all of that historical medical records. We do our due diligence in writing up the assessment. But, and I know the piece that most behavior analysts, and this is a blanket statement, likely don't have experience in is understanding every single funding source requirement, right? That might be the administration or the organization that develops the template. So I guess my question or my statement is, what do we do for a lot of, someone who's even as experienced as myself, who's been writing them for decades, it's still the nuance of one funding source versus another, and I missed one component. What do we provide to support the field in understanding, just make sure all of this is in there to prevent going to peer review. And then again, reinstating that peer review is not punitive, even though it feels like it is every time, no
So
matter
Nissa,
what.
before Olivia answers that or Ellie does, I'm curious, are you trying to think about it as a universal template that would work across funding sources, or is it more common to have multiple templates depending on the funding source?
I think from my experience in working at multiple orgs, it's the latter. I think that some organizations have said, hey, let's go to, and I don't want to say specific funding sources, but there are some that are quote unquote the gold standard. If we make it match for this funding source, everyone else will accept it. But then you go onto the website for another and it's like, don't forget this little nuance that gold standard funding source doesn't require. So ideally, if we think about, what CASP has done with their session note template and looking to create some standardization, ideally standardization would exist, but we know the nuance of our field is very individualized.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that there's perfect answer for that. There isn't this like overarching rule. There are different payer requirements. That's how most of our clients are getting their services funded. And so you do have to just kind of cater to what each of those payers need. I mean, like you said, I think a lot of the orgs that are doing those gold standard treatment plans it's helpful, like having the most stringent requirements and just having that be your template. But I think leaning on the resources, like you said, CASP has some good guidelines. The ABA Coding Coalition has some really helpful resources on there too. And then always going on the actual payer's website. And I think it's hard to find what you're looking for on there because the websites have a lot of tabs. And so what I always think is helpful instead of navigating the websites is you can just Google the payer's name and then ABA policy provider manual, and it will usually be the first link that pops up. And it's usually a PDF that has that specific payer requirements all tailored to ABA. So that's kind of helpful too.
That's a really good tip. Yeah. And the other things like the CASP, we can provide links. You'll have to do your own Googling, but any documents identified specifically, we can provide links to everybody. Okay.
Well, as we're saying that, there is a great one. Sorry. The APBA forum, it's like the APBA Funders Forum recommendation for treatment planning that came out last year. It's really good.
I was just going to say the websites are super confusing just from personal experience. And so that Google trick is also super helpful to pair those words together.
Okay. What else? What other tips do you guys have on that initial authorization and planning?
Don't procrastinate, probably. I think that's a big one. I feel like anytime I've been rushed has been typically a time where it maybe doesn't go as smoothly as I would like it to. And so really getting in and like setting practices, I think as a new BCBA to make sure that you're updating goal. Like if you're updating a program or a goal, go and throw it on like the treatment plan, or if you're using CentralReach, like make sure you're structuring it out in the learning tree. And so that you have it all there and like utilizing whether it's been mastered or met as you're going through it, because then you're just writing the treatment plan as you're kind of making those changes in the moment, and you have a lot less to do during the time when you need to submit it. I feel like to really clean up like any of the fine details and feel comfortable with the material in that document. Does that make sense?
I also think this is really hard depending on your caseload, but tracking your authorizations. And I know there are a number of systems available for tracking. I know in our practice management, we have that as well, but having almost those alarms within your calendar to say, hey, this kiddo's treatment plan is due in 1 month. It's time to start the template or, prep the assessment, send the assessment over to the parents to get their insight. Those are things that I think, Ellie, to your point, if we are waiting till the last minute, then we're trying to gather all of the information from the family, look at the assessment, conduct the reeval, pop in with the learner. And then if you're doing multiple, and I know this happens even today in my own clinical practice, there are times when like I've got 4 or 5 learners at one time and all of their treatment plans are due within a week or two. And I'm spending my whole weekend writing because I don't have the time during the week.
They're always in batches, always in like 5 or 6 batches.
And I'm sorry, I skipped right over. Anybody who is watching us on YouTube right now or video, just not listening in the audio only, then you have a graphic that Olivia has put together for CR Unite, which is our user conference coming up in October. She's going to be going over another angle of this presentation there. So do you want to just address this just a little bit? I know you were walking us through verbally, but what are we seeing on our screen if we're looking?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is kind of just like an overview of the workflow from start to finish, from when we get our clients' assessments going to what the outcome could be. So yeah, we've got the assessments. We're making that a first request. That initial clinical review has those three options: approval, administrative denial, or peer review. Of course, if you get an approval, fantastic. We're just moving right along. We're doing services as we requested them and as they're approved. If you get an admin denial, all denials, whether it be admin or clinical, do have appeals rights, but admin denials are so much trickier because it has nothing to do with your clinical information. It has everything to do with what's going on administratively in the policy. So you do get appeals rights, but that's trickier. So I would recommend, if you get that, to start talking about referrals, other support options in school and things like that. Or then the third option is a peer review, which is, like we said, going to be the main topic here, which is kind of like another clinical review that's a lot more focused, and it's based on whatever the initial clinical reviewer had concerns about. So it's kind of a second line of defense, I guess. And then from that peer review, you've got three more options: approval, partial approval / partial denial, and then a full denial.
Okay. And everything ends with you always have the right to appeal.
If you get a denial, yeah, a partial denial or a full denial, yeah, always have the right to appeal. You and the family do too.
Okay. So I need to pause and do our first secret word for our CEU seekers. And the first secret word is initial, INITIAL, initial. All right. So I'm in peer review.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen?
It's a scary thing. No, it's really not. It's a conversation. It's usually a phone call. Sometimes there is an option for a chart review. I would stress for anyone listening to do the phone call. It gives you a lot more room to have a conversation. It is, you just give more information that way. But it's pretty brief. It's usually like a 15, 20-minute phone call. Ellie, I don't know if that's been your experience, if it's been shorter or longer than that.
No, I'd say that's about accurate.
Okay. Yeah, and it's usually the peer review. The first initial clinical review is with like a master's level clinician. The peer review is going to be a doctorate level clinician. Sometimes they're also BCBAs. Not all the time, but sometimes they are.
Yeah, I'd heard that. So is that common that it's not a BCBA that you get on the other end of the phone, or do you know?
Yeah, it's going to vary based on state, based on payer. I would say these days it's becoming more and more common for it to also be a BCBA or a BCBA-D. But yeah, it's gonna depend. Every state has different rules on who can sign off on things as well.
Okay. And what's their role there? I mean, because I'm going to play the novice, I'm going to give you all of the fear and scary questions, right, that I see on social media, especially.
Yeah.
What, like, are they trying to, like, is their primary thing, are they looking for an excuse to deny me?
No, I don't think so. I think it can, being on both sides as a clinic, it can feel like that. You're really pushing to get the approval. You know, you have spent so many hours writing this like perfectly curated treatment plan. And that's why it feels so punishing, because you're like, I worked so hard. Can I please just have an approval? So I think coming at it from that lens, it can get a little bit hostile or feel like you're arguing. But yeah, I think coming from it from like a conversation standpoint, their whole goal is to dive a little bit deeper into whatever section of the treatment plan was flagged as a concern. So during that first clinical review, they're going through the entire treatment plan from start to finish. In the peer review, it's much more concentrated. So whatever that clinical reviewer noted, whether it be severe behaviors with no safety plan, or goals that are outside of those, core domains that we work on of communication, social, and behavior reduction, or lack of parent involvement, whatever that concern is, they're writing that down and sending it to the peer reviewer. And then when you get into that conversation, the peer reviewer will probably open up, acknowledge what was concerning and say, what's up with that? Like, okay, you don't have a safety plan. Like, tell me more about that. So it's really just kind of drilling down into those specifics.
Do I know, like, if I've got this appointment with this peer review, do I know what they have flagged?
You should. You should. They should tell you. And if they don't, that is my biggest tip, is to ask. You can straight up say, okay, sounds good. I can definitely do that appointment. Can you tell me why? Like, what is it that you're flagging? And then, yeah, you can better prepare for the conversation, of course.
Is there a checklist that the initial reviewer is going through? Is it what's on the funding sources website? Like, I'm imagining if I were on the other side, so the peer review side, or the role that maybe you had, Olivia, do you have a checklist in front of you as you're reviewing the treatment plan to say, okay, met this criteria, and I'm going through almost like a task analysis?
I mean, again, I hate to keep saying this, but it is going to vary by payer. But a lot of payers, again, if you're Googling the payer name and then ABA medical necessity criteria or ABA policy, a lot of them will have at least every question that they're going to ask you in that review so that you can follow along. Because I think, Ellie, we were talking that a lot of them have rating scales or definitions or things like that. And it's coming at you so fast that you're like, I don't know. So a lot of them will have at least every question that they're going to ask you during that review, especially the ones that do it over the phone.
I don't know. Can I say I don't know? Olivia is nodding. Rest of you who are just listening, Olivia is nodding.
I was waiting for Ellie to chime in. That was your big tip that I loved.
Yeah, I feel like, and I was going to mention that too when you talked about timelines. I've never had somebody rushing me. So like they can go pretty quick. But also if you are taking your time and you're asking them questions or you feel like you need to kind of go into more explanation, I've had calls that last an hour where they were willing to like repeat the definitions or repeat the scaling criteria and all of that. And so I think just asking questions. And then if you say, I don't know, it's kind of, yeah, I don't know, but I will find that answer for you. Or by the next review period, I will have something in place for that. And they've always been very respectful, I guess, for lack of a better word, for that answer.
I really love that too, because you're being like an active participant in the conversation. You're not just like, I don't know. You're saying like, I don't know. I will talk to the parent. I will talk to the teacher. I'll talk to the SLP. Like you're promising to follow up. It's just in this exact moment, I don't have an answer for you.
And I think it's helpful too, because then for the next review, I'm like, that was a great question that I should know the answer to. So I'm going to make sure that I'm asking parents those questions before I submit a treatment plan as well.
I like that like you just spun it for me a little bit, that it feels like the implication that I pick up on when I hear people talk about it is that you're being called into an inquisition, like you are the defendant. But
It feels that way.
tweaking that idea that I can ask them questions too about what and why and how they need to hear this in order to understand it, makes it feel a little bit more equal, I guess.
I mean, it's a peer-to-peer. It's supposed to be colleagues and peers, talking about things, but it doesn't feel like that when it feels like they hold this approval, and you can't get to it. So, definitely ask questions during the clinical review, but also ask questions during the peer review. So if they're giving you recommendations, you can say like, oh, I've got a couple barriers to do that. Like parents work 2 jobs or, whatever the barriers are. Like, I would love to be able to do X, Y, and Z that you're recommending. How would you approach that? And see what they say. And that might help kind of turn the tables a little bit and turn it more into like a collaborative conversation.
I like that idea. That one has come up a lot in my experience, especially the parent training component. Parents are both working, or if parent training has to occur virtually because they can't come in. And it does, cause a disruption in not knowing how to answer that, saying, I'm doing everything I can to ensure this parent is involved. There are numerous barriers, children, jobs, whatever it is. But I like that tip of turning it around and saying, well, what would you recommend, or what have you?
Yeah. Particularly for that caregiver one, because there's so much that's out of your control as a clinician. Like you are doing your best. And I think one of the recommendations that I remember from my time was that, someone's with the child, even if it's not the parent. And so we did some caregiver goals for the grandma and the aunt that were helping with caregiving. So it doesn't have to be parent. So, but that only came about from that conversation.
I've also had a lot of reviewers give me good goal ideas saying like, we can't really approve this goal. It's kind of out of our scope, but have you considered targeting that skill this way? Or have you considered teaching it this way? Or what if you change the wording of the goal and it gives you a little bit more control over what you're using for it, which has also been really helpful. So I think in hindsight, a lot of reviews have been helpful if you go into them with an open mind and as you kind of said, peer-to-peer mindset.
We get a lot of requests for training on writing goals for medical necessity. And I'm assuming that a lot of the red flags have to do with the goal selection not being worded correctly to reflect medical necessity. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, worded correctly is tricky. We're not trying to be wordsmiths here. I think Ellie said too, we want to think too, is this in our scope or not in our scope? But I agree. I mean, I think especially if you're moving so quickly, we know what we plan to do, but all they have to go off of is the exact words that we put on the treatment plan. So 100%, if we have something that's worded maybe a little bit vague and it could sound more motorish or more OT or speech or whatever it is, making sure it's really clearly defined how we're approaching it from a behavior analytic lens is definitely helpful.
Yeah. And that's all I meant, that sometimes people write the way they speak. In speaking, you're shorthanding things a lot of the time, and it's not exactly what you meant, but it could be misinterpreted by someone who's reading it, that maybe this is belonging in a scope somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I have a question to that topic, and you can refrain from answering, but one of the things I think about in this conversation, in this topic, is the use of AI in building a lot of these treatment plans. It is something that's happening in the field. It's coming. And I'm just wondering how funders are going to be able to, I don't want to say identify that, because that's not the intent of I'm going to catch you. It's more of determine if that was an appropriate goal. Is AI something that funders should consider or are considering? And have you seen in your work if that's been something that's impacted approvals?
It's such a good question, because we're just right on that cusp now. I don't have a ton of experience in that, so I'm going to use our own tips and saying I'm not quite sure. But I think it's just conceptually a very good topic as clinicians to talk about. Is it a bad thing if AI helps us write our goals? If we're still looking at it and it's still tied to the assessments and it's clinically relevant for our client, is it a bad thing? I think it maybe not. It's not a bad thing. But yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys think as well.
I mean, I asked the question just because in my review and prep for this and some other work, again, going back to that APBA treatment planning document that was shared or developed and published, they talk about the biggest issue with treatment plans is the goal writing, that the goals are not behavioral, that they're not measurable, that they don't describe a change over time, the way that we're trained to write these goals. So it kind of is leading into, if that is the biggest problem, and I don't know if that's, there is a reference here for Reineke and colleagues in 2024, but is that from the funders saying, hey, these goals are not medically necessary and observable and measurable, or is it the goals are not something that we can measure over time? So is it better to use AI to write the goals if the prompt says, hey, here's my goal for the learner, I just don't know how to write it? Again, that's a question to the listeners, to the panel, to everyone, but it is something that the field is showing with the literature that we're having a problem.
It's like everything with AI. I mean, Nissa and I are both adjunct faculty members, and we talk about the use of AI by students and where is the line between it's thinking for you versus it's helping you with your expression. And I know that there's always been a lot of questions about how are funders going to react to AI helping out drafting treatment plans and goals and all of that. But my question from behind the scenes is, first of all, I don't know how funders will know unless it's making errors. And if it's making errors, then what's the difference in it making an error versus a human making an error? It still gets flat. I get more concerned about the clinician not paying attention to what it's doing. That's where my fear is.
Yeah. And I mean, this was not my experience on that end, but they on the insurance side may be working with AI as well at some point. So I think,
True.
I don't know that you can like fault a clinician for using it if we're also using it on the payer side. And I'm not sure about how deep we're getting into that just yet, but I'm sure it's coming.
Well, and just to be clear, Olivia has been with us since AI blew up. So
I have.
yeah.
That's why I layered my question. Just kind of
Just
something
want to
that,
make sure everybody who's
people are-
listening understands you don't really have any secret insights into
I
how they're
don't.
dealing with that. Yeah. All right, let's do secret word number 2 is prepare, PREPARE. Always a good one. Okay, so what else do we need to know about having that conversation? How do we, how should we be thinking about what's coming out of it? Is it always going to be a decision made at the end of one conversation and then that's that?
At the end of the peer review, yes, there is a decision.
Okay.
That's kind of the end of the road in terms of the time frame that you have to give your clinical input.
So there's not usually they're asking questions and you're not quite sure, but you can come back. Can you resubmit? That sort of thing.
Yeah, once you make that request, just kind of like legally, the ball is rolling, and there needs to be a decision. Because you could rescind the request, like take it back. Then you would have to resubmit and kind of go through everything again. But yeah, at that point, all the clinical information's out there, and there's going to be a decision. But I think that's why what we're talking about is like if you aren't sure, you could say like, "Can I send you more information?" They will likely say like, "No, I'm good." But saying I will absolutely include that at the next authorization period or being really collaborative, I think goes a long way.
So I guess from my experience, I've always been able to schedule it where I was going to have time to prepare for a review as well. I don't know, is there like a timeline for when you have to schedule that by? Is there like a max amount of time you can go?
Yeah, so it's called turnaround time, actually. That's like another term. And I'm a broken record at this point, but it is different for every policy. I didn't make those rules. No one, don't shoot the messenger here, but it's different for every policy for the client, like the client's health insurance policy. So some of them, the conversation needs to happen within a couple of days. Others, it can be maybe in a week or so. So that's why it may fluctuate from client to client. But if you want more time to prepare, you could ask them to push it out as far as it is allowed to go for that policy.
Okay.
Curious, Olivia, did you learn anything that you're willing to share? Did you learn anything when you switched into the other side, so to speak? Did you learn things that you thought, man, I wish I had known that when I was submitting?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these tips and tricks, like you're allowed to ask questions. I think especially when you're a new BCBA, you're just trying to get your answers correct that you wouldn't even think to ask a question. So I think that's really helpful. Another thing that I think a lot of people probably do is that if you're really nervous, you can have a supervisor or a colleague sit in on the phone call with you.
Wow.
And as long as you disclose, like, hey, I have my supervisor here. Here's their first name. Here's their last name. That'll just get noted on who was present. And that's totally fine. They don't even have to speak. They can just be there for you. They could help you take notes because you do want to be documenting during all of this because on the other side, they're documenting everything. It's going into the client's medical record. So you want to be taking your notes. So if that's just too much to do, to talk and answer and write notes, have someone else do that for you, or they could be flipping through your treatment plan if they ask for a specific goal and give it to you really quickly. Like someone could be there supporting you, which I think is really helpful. And I don't think I knew that in the beginning.
I didn't know that. So I think that would be very affirming, just being able to know that you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely asked a supervisor one time to sit in with me, and it was really helpful just in terms of confidence, because even she was like, oh, I actually don't think I've done one of these before. So being able to like go and experience that together too. I feel like as a new BCBA, you may not ask that because you don't want them to think that you can't do it. And a lot of the times it's something that maybe your supervisor hasn't necessarily gone through either.
So that leads me to the next obvious question then. How often? I mean, how for those of you who are submitting frequently, how often do you find yourself in a peer review?
I would be sharing how you write treatment plans, but in my experience, I've only been in 2 in the last decade. But I have supported other behavior analysts, and I mean, I would say 1 every other year, so it's really not that frequent. It can be a conversation. In my last experience, I did get 2 pushed back that I wrote, and it was because they wanted more background information on challenging behavior. So it was just a couple extra statements and a couple extra graphs.
And that was still part of just the clinical review, right? You weren't going to peer review. Yeah.
No, yeah. But of course, as soon as you get even a kickback, it's like, oh, what did I do wrong? I thought I included everything. And just like you said, Olivia, it is personal. You're spending so much of your time doing your due diligence. And I say this in all of my assessment training, which is we are the artist painting the picture of that learner, right? That person on the other end has never seen the child. They don't know what they look like, what their life is like. So you have to spend your time painting that picture so the person looking at the art can really appreciate the art. So I always feel like it's a ding to me when
your art isn't pretty. Yeah. No, I think that's really a good point to hit home, is that they've never seen the client. They don't know what the barriers are. And so making sure that that's really clear. And then if it's not clear in your treatment plan and you go to peer review, that's just another opportunity for you to share that information. So it's a good time to share that information.
It makes me think of like a BACB audit, right? It's something that everybody dreads and fears, but in reality, if you're doing everything as you're supposed to, you might get a random draw, but it's not something that's going to be happening to you once a month or anything like that. Yeah.
No, I think I only had 1 in 7 years, so it's a little bit more rare.
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So I think it just depends on payer and state. A lot of the times it's more, I've gotten pushback or feedback during the clinical reviews. And that is often like email or some update in a portal that billing communicates to me, and I'm able to ask questions, because sometimes it's not the most objective question or denial, and it's unclear what to fix. And so a lot of the times it's been through that clinical review process that I'm able to ask questions back and say, hey, like, I'm not understanding the question. Can you say it a different way or give me an example? But I've only had 2 peer reviews in the entire time I've only had it escalated.
Isn't that interesting that out of all of us on this call, there's only been 5 peer reviews total? So it's not like every clinical review.
Yeah. Yep. It's just nerve-wracking when it does happen. I know. I remember so I've had those couple, but one with a particular learner that was extremely challenging, where I took a room in a clinic and I just spread all of the learner's information out. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have everything. If they ask, I'm going to be able to find it. This is where child behavior is. This is parent background. And it was because I had exceeded our recommendation of what is standard for that funding source. So it's nerve-wracking. It just becomes this, like, I worked so hard to develop this plan. What did I miss? And how can I ensure it's in there next time?
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of loop back to something you said earlier, Olivia, and we just sort of flew by it. But in the clinical review, you said you sometimes get the option of chart review versus the phone call.
So that's for peer review.
I'm sorry. Okay, so that was for review. Mm-hmm. What would be happening if I opted for just the chart review?
Yeah, so if you did the clinical review, they had some concerns and they referred to peer review. If you just did the chart review, that is just the peer reviewer going through the medical record. You are not involved as a clinician. It's just them looking at your written treatment plan, the medical record with maybe like past authorizations or past notes, and then the notes of the clinical reviewer who referred you to peer review and like what they're concerned about. And then they have to make a determination based off of that, which, like we keep saying, like, that's not a lot. It's just what's on paper. It's very flat. It's very two-dimensional. It's not any of the nuances and anecdotal information that you can provide over the phone.
And you don't get to advocate for anything if you're not there.
Right. Or
So
answer any questions.
why would anyone ever opt for it then?
Sometimes it defaults for like timing, if they're not available, or if the BCBA is going to be gone, it has to happen within a certain amount of time. I would say those are pretty rare. It just is an option. I would say I've only ever done a peer review over the phone. I've only ever known people to do it over the phone, but it is something that can default to that. Nissa, you said that you have sat in on peer reviews. Was that mainly for new BCBAs or people just who haven't ever done it before?
Okay. For both. So just supporting BCBA, having the treatment plan on my own screen in case they needed backup. And then a couple learners where there were situations that were out of the norm. So if a CPS was called and we had to have the background on that, any of those unusual situations where a secondary clinician was recommended.
Did you chime in during the call or you were just kind of supporting from the background?
For the one where we did call CPS for the family, I did chime in and support just because I was one of the main supervisors supporting that.
Yeah. And it can be both. You can be like a behind the scene, like silent, just grabbing papers and helping the person stay calm, or you could chime in, especially if you're a supervisor, and give some more details.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the takeaways I hope our listeners walk away with is that it isn't a scary, even for myself, if I get one next year, I'm going to remember this conversation and say, it's not scary. We are collaborative, which is really what we truly want to be. But I think there is this misconception that they are out to turn down our treatment plan and say no. And I think we can dispel that.
I think a big takeaway too is that there needs to be a reason for approval. So you have to be able to give that clinical justification, because I've seen some wonky stuff where I'm like, oh, I don't know that this is going to go through. And then it gets a full approval because the clinician fully, just like Ellie was saying, fully spelled out like, yep, this looks weird in the treatment plan, but I have a plan to remedy this. I have a plan to, address these barriers. And the peer reviewer was like, great, you can have 6 more months to do that then. So I think a solid clinical rationale goes a long way.
I would think that part of the worst part of this whole thing would be if you do get the denial, then what? And just sitting down and kind of having to tell the parent, is that on the BCBA to tell the parent, or do they get an ugly letter in the mail from insurance company? How did they hear this?
They do get communication from their insurance. It is a letter that goes through. But, the Postal Service's snail mail is slow. So the first person that's going to tell them is probably the BCBA. And I mean, we've all been there. It's a terrible conversation. It's the worst. And I think knowing and understanding the process as the BCBA is the most important part so that you can communicate effectively to the family. They're already going to be devastated or upset about either a partial denial, which just means maybe a portion of the hours are denied, or a full denial, which of course would be the worst case scenario, which all hours were denied. They're already upset about that. So if you're coming in saying like, I don't really know what happened, like that's of course going to be more upsetting to be like, what do you mean you don't know what happened? You were in the call. So I think understanding the process and being able to say like, this is what I presented. These were their recommendations. This is how I countered those recommendations. And then this was the final outcome, and being able to walk them through the whole process.
Has anybody had to actually do that? Anybody got any experience with it?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. It's not the most, I just feel like it also comes with, it's easy to make the funder out to be the bad guy when really that's not going to help the situation. I don't think it's going to make the parents feel any better. And so leaving those situations, feeling confident that you understand the why behind the partial denial. In my experience, I've never gotten a full denial. Knowing the why and feeling good about like next steps and what the action items are, and being able to discuss that with the family. And I know like the previous time we talked, I mentioned that there's never been a question I've been asked that didn't make me a better BCBA in the long run. And I think that those conversations are helpful with the parents too, of a lot of the times the partial denial reasons are like a conversation I've probably been avoiding with the parent, or that maybe I didn't think to have with the parent that needed to be had, of like involvement, parent involvement. We've got to figure out a way to get you involved, or things like of that nature, I guess.
I hadn't even considered something like that. So the impetus to restrain your own avoidance, I guess, or to retrain your own avoidance and go ahead and deal with those things on the front end. That's interesting. Yeah. Nissa, your eyes. I saw the Melissa thought happen.
Just thinking of what a great little quote that was, right? That it's made you a better BCBA. And then even thinking back to my own experience of that's true. There are times when perhaps it was a difficult conversation that should have been had with the family early on, or, I think about some of the learners I worked with where maybe behavior challenges were so excessive, but the parent maybe didn't agree in treatment plan review, saying, that's not that big of a deal. It's not that important to us. But in the treatment plan, as the clinician, that's what I wrote because it was challenging for us to manage. And I've seen situations where the funding source came back and said, well, if the behavior is so challenging, why aren't parents indicating that? Why, are hours occurring more frequently in the home, which is where the behaviors are occurring? Just these conversations where it is difficult to tell a parent, right now we're with a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old. They're very adorable and cute and we can manage by blocking, but we have to think about them 5 years, 10 years, that the long-term quality of life for everybody. Those are hard conversations for a newer clinician who's really being thrust into all of these responsibilities.
I think just going off of that too, hours is a big one. I'd be curious, Olivia, to hear your point of view on that one, but too small, like not having enough hours or having too many hours that you're requesting. And as a new BCBA, you just want to be helpful. And I think it comes with experience where you start to understand if you have a parent who's not agreeing to the treatment recommendation that you're making, maybe they want to do less hours than the 25 that you offered or that you recommended, that you need to stand by your clinical recommendations. And I think if you are getting to like clinical review pushback or peer review pushback, and that is the case, having those conversations with the parents too, of just maybe that's not, we all want to help, but if you have a clinical recommendation that's like a prescription and you're not having the parents buy in or anything like that too, I feel like being able to make recommendations for what's next or maybe what's a better fit, because ultimately without the buy-in, you need the parents buy-in. And so I think those have been tricky conversations that have come from peer reviews or clinical reviews a lot of the times. And I think going into it again, feeling confident of like, okay, well, I want to help you and your family. So if this isn't something that works for you, let's find something that is, and maybe that's not going to be me, or maybe that's not going to be this, environment, or what can we get and add and tweak, so that just, I guess, working as a team is where I'm going with that, of really trying to have those conversations from a team aspect, and also knowing that you're not going to be able to fix everything. And that's okay.
That's really a big deal.
A whole other episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. Curious things that aren't taught in school also. Where did you guys learn to assess or to determine how many hours you were going to ask for? Did insurance teach you that too?
I was going to say that dosage conversation is like 3 episodes.
I know. Yeah. So just as a quick story, I mean, individually, where's that coming from?
Honestly, pushback from treatment plans and hours, I feel like, have been like the most educational for me, of having somebody again ask, like, why do you need, this kid is in X, Y, and Z therapies outside of ABA. Why do you need this many hours when the progress that we're seeing in the graphs is not represented? So I think, can I change the way I'm collecting data to show the progress that I feel supports that? Or are they right and maybe my clinical recommendation was not appropriate? So I think having people question what I'm recommending has been the most educational from my experience, but no one really taught me, when this kid does X, Y, or Z, you recommend 20 hours.
No assessment to hours formula yet.
Yeah.
My experience has been kind of a combination of that, the feedback and some of the kickback, but also I think the CAST practice guidelines, second and third editions, have really helped. The APBA recommendations. And then, early on, it was a lot of that literature that we saw in the 40 hours that were supportive of the comprehensive program. But then I started to really bring on learners that were in that focused category of like, we're only going to focus on these particular areas. And as recently as 3 days ago, a BCBA that I'm mentoring reached out and said, I think this learner needs 40, but they're only available 20. Should I match it in the clinical treatment plan? I said, absolutely not. Your clinical judgment is 40. You recommend 40. You could put something in there due to all of these other extracurriculars. They're not coming in for 40, but you continue to recommend what you feel is appropriate according to goals, objectives, history. So I think it's a combination. There are trainings out there on medical necessity, goal writing. I think you can find them everywhere. Organizations, some companies only take the comprehensive learners, some don't serve the focused learners. I think that it is a combination of your training and experience, the CEUs, as well as your organization's requirements. But I think, again, going back to us as clinicians and knowing the learner, we're the ones who are on the hook for the hours, the supervision, the parent training. It is our scope of competence. So I think our recommendation should come from you as a clinician who knows the learner and your ability to provide that treatment with your treatment team.
I personally, I don't know what Ellie and Olivia think, but I personally love that statement you made that even if the parents aren't willing to do it, your recommendation is your recommendation. You can write around it. You can explain why it's not happening, but you shouldn't recommend less than what you really think the person needs.
Absolutely. I mean, part of the medical
100%.
record, you wouldn't, fudge the medical record. So I completely
Yeah.
And I think that can be hard. Again, going back to like the times I've gotten pushback from a funder or payer, when you feel differently than a previous BCBA, like maybe it was a transition piece or something. I think that's always kind of a situation where as a younger BCBA, I probably wouldn't have felt as confident to put what my recommendation was. Because you don't want it to get flagged by insurance or anything like that. But again, I think that's where asking questions and having those open conversations with the funder, the payer, whoever you're talking to during that review process is really helpful.
Yeah, going up in hours is tricky. So like if you inherit a case that is super low hours and the client's not making progress and you're like, whoa, it's completely different. What I would recommend going up is really tricky. And so you would need an even stronger clinical rationale, even stronger explanation, ask more questions. I mean, it would be a deeper dive that you would need to take.
All right. I need to do the last secret word, modification, MODIFICATION. I don't know why I chose such a long word. Modification is the last secret word for CEU seekers. I guess parting thoughts now. This has been a lot of information. I know we've dropped a lot of resources, names of documents and such. Did we get them all? Did anybody have any other resources that you wanted to mention or share for folks who are looking for more?
Let's see. We did the Googling of the ABA policy and the provider manual. ABA Coding Coalition is really helpful. Of course, the CAST guidelines. And then I think one I didn't mention is the Autism Law Summit has a very long document, like hundreds of pages long, called the ABA Authorization and Appeals Playbook. And that has a lot of really great information about this process as well.
Okay. And then Nissa, you offered some things up as well. APBA, you said?
APBA has one that will drop in. They also have some citations in there. And then I think anything you can find with CEUs on medical necessity is going to be your friend, and organization-specific training.
I think also having an understanding of the diagnostic criteria and how that relates to medical necessity was something that just felt so beyond me as a newer BCBA that I wish I would have probably spent more time getting to know.
Very good point. All right. So I'm also making a list as editor-in-chief, content that we need to develop. But yeah, I will ask everybody to send me their resources so we can attach it to this episode. And people who are listening, if you were triggered on other topics that you would like us to put more attention to, let us know in the review. You get an opportunity to give us some feedback on what you've heard and to request additional information for or topics that you want, whether that's as an episode of the Behavioral View or just course content that we can develop to make life easier for CR Institute. users. But I want to say thank you to this group. This has been a very informative episode. Appreciate you coming, Olivia and Ellie.
Thanks for having
Miss
me.
always.
And don't forget about CR Unite in Chicago. We will
That's
do
right.
a deeper dive on this, so come see us then.
Yeah, we'll have this and much, much more. So those of you who are interested, check us out on the website. CR Unite 2026 Google, well, 2025. I'm living in 2026 right now with RBT 40-hour course development. 2025 CR Unite on our webpage. You can find out more there. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month on the Behavioral View.
Thanks for joining us for the Behavioral View. Ready to lock in your CEU? Just follow the link below, complete the quiz, and enter the secret words. It's that easy. You've already done the work, so why not take the credit? Subscribe and join us for the next episode. We'll see you soon.